Hey guys, happy 2019! And to start the new year, I actually have a good build. This may very well be one of the most satisfying mapping character that I personally ever did. And I bet you already saw a bunch of Winter Orb builds. And I don't really like doing meta builds. I try to search for the off-meta items, off-meta approaches. And I really wanted to play Winter Orb. So to not feel too bad about playing meta skill, I added non-meta item, Doedre skin. I already talked about Doedre skin in my previous video, so just to wrap it up quickly, Doedre skin is a unique body armor which allows you to basically apply 6 curses to enemies through the sort of unique kind of totem, which is not really a totem. Well, Doedre's effigy. All the curses inside that body armor will be cast on enemies through the Doedre's effigy thing. And of course we don't need to be linked. This Doedre's effigy is now instant cast and you can place 3 of them, but we don't stack, it's just to cover more AoE. Now let's talk a bit more about builds, pros and cons. There's probably a lot to talk about, so I'm gonna leave timestamps in the description. So this is life based Occultist, and I'm using a staff, which means my life pool isn't very high. Despite having 201% life from the passive skill tree, as you can see at level 91 I barely have 5.8 thousand life. But that does not mean that this build is very squishy. While mapping, enemies almost never even hit you, and the only problem is Syndicate and bigger bosses like Shaper's Guardian and Shaper himself, but I did manage to defeat Shaper deathless. This is because standard bosses have 60% reduced curse effectiveness, while Shaper and Guardians have 80% reduced curse effectiveness. So while this build absolutely destroys map bosses, but damage against Shaper or even Elder and Guardians was nothing special. To backtrack a bit and talk about defensive layers, I actually take 20% less hit damage, and that is not counting curses. But then again, in this case, Enfeeble against Shaper would only give you around 8% reduced damage. But against all the other standard bosses and unique enemies like Syndicate, you would be taking 35% less damage. And here's how. If you look at Occultist, Frigid Wake, the last line, nearby chilled enemies deal 10% reduced damage with hits. And Malediction. Enemies you curse have Malediction. Enemies with Malediction deal 10% reduced damage and take 10% increased damage. So you just need to chill enemy and curse. While chilling big bosses like Shaper could be a bit tricky, but you can still use Cold Snap and drop the Chill Ground or Arctic Breath, or just hope that you do enough damage. And then against standard bosses, Enfeeble provides a bit over 15% reduced damage taken. In fact, I think Occultist is really interesting because there is actually a way to get 100% reduced damage taken, but that's only for one hit and that's only for spell, which is a bit complicated. I may do a separate video about that. You also kind of need to stay closer to enemies, well, whatever nearby means. But at the same time you want to stay a bit away so that Ice Spear second stage would proc, which is where the most damage comes from. So positioning yourself against big bosses is very important. Which is why I think this build is not really suited for big bosses fight. It's just extremely good for delving, for example, or just mapping. And I think I haven't been killed by normal enemies, not even once. The only times when I died was some kind of bullshit after death mechanic or Syndicate. Oh, one quick disadvantage to this build. I think I'm not entirely sure, is it curses or is it Winter Orb that lags your PC a lot? I guess it's more like server lag. When you go into a big enemy pack and the Winter Orb keeps shooting, it produces quite noticeable freeze. But personally I was not bothered by that. Oh, and this build can do basically all sorts of map modes except for the Elemental Reflect, and no leash probably would also be very annoying. But even triple damage mods on a map was no problem. I'm really amazed how effective this is, but I think most of the credits goes to the Winter Orb and not actually curses. Now to make this build, it's actually pretty cheap. The only, I guess, kind of expensive item is the staff, which I managed to craft quite easily. I just used one Frigid fossil and tried multiple times and just managed to craft this. Unfortunately, my luck is in a complete garbage state now, since basically the start of the league, so I still wasn't able to even 6-link anything. So I could actually have more damage if I 6-linked the staff, and I was actually trying to craft a better staff. I made a 40% quality staff and then tried to 6-link it, wasted all my currency and just deleted the item, so just let's move on. You don't need that OP staff just for the map clear. In fact, you don't even need a staff if you can get a pseudo 6-link helmet, or maybe some kind of weird rare gloves. I still prefer to use Fenumus Weave gloves, which are not really expensive at the moment, and it is still probably cheaper to get these gloves than to get Aspect of the Spider on some rare good item. Also, since I am using Marylene's Fallacy amulet, I was trying to get a bit more crit chance by trying to craft a shaped diamond ring for additional crit chance. which may be a bit more expensive, but you don't really need that. And the boots, I didn't change them because, well, I needed more dex, and that's the only reason. You don't really need spell dodge. You just need to cover enough resistances and life. So rings, belts, boots, and helmet, just life and resistances. And I don't have any OP jewels. Like I said, I am freaking broke, so I managed to craft only one decent jewel. But on jewels, you mostly want flat life, not percentage, flat life, and then some flat damage, preferably cold. Or crit multiplier, but crit multiplier is usually the most expensive one. And one careful planning jewel because you do need a bunch of dex. Now let's talk about skill setup. In the staff, which already has casual chanting, I have Winter Orb linked to GMP, Hypothermia, Ice Spear, and Power Charge on crit. By the way, I have level 21 Ice Spear, but that was after I killed the Shaper. If you got more links, or maybe you got even pseudo 8 link staff, you may add cold penetration or added cold damage. Control destruction will probably give you the most damage despite lowering crit chance, but I would not recommend that because Marylene's Fallacy already reduces crit chance by a lot, and it's only beneficial to the second form of Ice Spear. So cold penetration and added cold damage. Even level 4 Empower would give less damage when added cold, but of course it is a bit more trickier to color green sockets on the staff. And I end up having a bit over 1 million DPS with second form Ice Spear, not counting the Winter Orb. That is of course against Shaper. If you had pseudo 8 link staff, you could probably reach close to 2 million DPS with just Ice Spear. And then you could definitely destroy Shaper very fast. Now the curses inside body armor are Elemental Weakness, Temporal Chain with Quality important, Walrus Mark, Frostbite, and Feeble, Projectile Weakness at around level 11 because of Dex requirement, and if you want more damage you can swap Enfeeble for Assassin's Mark. In my boots I have cast when damage taken linked with Immortal Call and Valrighteous Fire, both linked to increased duration, which I sometimes use it against bosses if I don't die immediately. In my helmet I have Flame Dash and Frost Bomb with increased duration and Arcane Surge level 1. Now the gloves setup is a bit tricky. I was unable to unlink them properly, but you basically want Cold Snap linked with cast when damage taken and Bone Chill, and then separately Herald of Ice. But it doesn't really hurt if all sockets are linked. But if they are, then Herald of Ice will be affected by Bone Chill and will increase the mana reservation. And enemies chilled by Cold Snap will basically take more cold damage. And of course I have Aspect of the Spider, which slows nearby enemies' movement speed. And then you add Chill, all the curses, so enemies are very rarely even moving. Even Syndicate members move very slowly, but of course we can still one-shot you. Oh, and I do have Clarity on Amulet Corruption. But if you cannot get Clarity on Amulet Corruption, you can just put Clarity instead of Bone Chill. And that is all the suckers I had. And here's the passive skill tree. First I took Frigid Wake from Occultist and then went for the Malediction. As for the rest of the passive skill tree, as you notice, I didn't go through the spell damage nodes near the witch area, and I took cast speed, which doesn't really improve my DPS because casual chanting has fixed trigger rate, but cast speed does add smoothness to Winter Orb. I do have one skill effect duration wheel, and I took the big life wheel near the Scion. And I only took one node for curse effect. You don't really need more because as a Occultist you're already getting 25%, and curses against biggest bosses aren't going to be very effective anyway. There are of course different ways to optimize the passive skill tree, going for more damage, for less life, more curse effect. I found this to be working just fine, so I didn't really see any reasons to try and fix it. Obviously if you're not using a staff, don't take the staff nodes. Oh, and I don't really have a leveling guide. As soon as you can use Winter Orb, just use it. And I only put on Marylene's Fallacy once I get all the crit nodes. Until then, just use some decent amulet. Life resistance as maybe crit multi. Plus 2 duration tablet is very nice for leveling for Winter Orb. And you can just keep on using it until you get the Doedre skin. And that is pretty much all. I started my next build, which is most likely gonna be a Wander cast on crit, but I'm not entirely sure if I'm gonna continue that build. So if I get stuck with the build, I will most likely do another video talking about how you can get 100% reduced damage taken. But it's highly conditional and not really reliable against like Shaper Slam, so it's not gonna break any new meta, it's just some cool idea. I also had a couple other ideas, Ignite based Dorianis Touch, but I have a feeling that leveling that build could be a bit slow, and boring. Then some kind of wild burning arrow build which could one-shot map bosses. Let's see what else do I have. I just need to stretch it to 10 minutes. Yeah, I kind of also wanted to make a proper dual paradoxica build, and no lancing or shattering steel BS. Unfortunately that would require pretty decent jewels, and I'm very broke and my luck is very bad, so I think I'm just gonna have to stick to cast and crit Wanderer, because I have most of the items and the jewels. Anyway, thank you for watching and I'll see you soon.